All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. I'll talk a little slowly so people can continue to jump in, but we've got a good crowd already. So good afternoon and welcome to everyone who's joining. My name is Elizabeth Denton and I'm ACT's Membership Experience Manager. I want to thank you today for joining us for ACT's first October webinar, a panel discussion entitled Preparing for a Flexible, Adaptable Future Commute. This is sponsored by TripShot. Thank you, TripShot. Before we hear from our presenters this afternoon, I want to quickly take care of a few housekeeping items. All attendees are on mute during this webinar. If you have a question or have a problem hearing us, please type in the chat box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to answer your questions as the webinar gets going. We will be hosting a Q&A at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to type your questions as we go in the Q&A box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. When you're asking a question, please also identify if the question is for somebody in particular or if it's for the group. And finally, this session is being recorded and we'll have the recording up on the ACT website within 24 hours after the presentation ends. And so now I'd like to pass things over to David Strauss, ACT's Executive Director, to give an update on what ACT is currently working on.
Excellent. Thank you, Elizabeth. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you all for joining us on what is really a beautiful New England fall day up here outside of Boston. Webinars like today's are a great way to learn about new trends and issues within the industry from, of course, the comfort of your desk, couch, or kitchen table, providing you with valuable information that makes you more impactful in your work. As the premier association for TDM professionals, our goal is to not only support the growth of your individual skills and knowledge, but to also build a strong community of people and organizations working to advance and implement TDM within their work sites and within their communities. To each of our non-members joining us today, I want to say welcome and invite you to join ACT and be a part of this wonderful community. I guarantee you that ACT membership will be a valued investment in your own professional growth. After today's event, you'll actually receive a note from Elizabeth offering an opportunity to connect and learn more about ACT. And I hope to meet you soon at a future event as a full-fledged member. There's a lot going on within the association, so before I get started, I just want to take a moment to update y'all on some of our latest news and share some opportunities for some further involvement. I hope that most of you saw the recent announcement regarding the postponement of this year's TDM Forum, which was to be held in Atlanta November 10th to 11th. While not an easy decision to make, we felt that it was the most prudent decision to ensure the health and safety of all of our members. The TDM Forum will now shift to a virtual event that will be held in early to mid-December, so stay tuned for exact dates and details. The event will continue to feature our great keynote speaker, Dr. Reagan Patterson, who will speak on the important topic of equity in public transportation. There'll also be a mix of breakout sessions and, of course, the presentation of our 40 Under 40 awards. This week, we also opened up a call for interest to serve on one of ACT's 7 national board committees. These include diversity and inclusion, finance, governance, membership, professional development, programs and events, and public policy. These committees provide members with the ability to really dive deep into a specific aspect of ACT's operations, where you can lend your expertise and unique skills to push forward the work of the entire association, introduce new ideas, and of course, take on an important leadership role within the industry. If you're looking for a way to contribute to ACT, this is a rewarding and highly valued one within the organization. There's information up on our website, as well as the email that went out earlier this week on how to submit your statement of interest. Lastly, applications for ACT's Impact Leadership Program close tomorrow, October 8th. If you or a member of your organization or team are interested in strengthening your leadership skills, building a cohort of peers from across the country, and deepening your knowledge of TDM, I really highly encourage you to look into submitting an application for this 9-month program that kicks off with a 3-day retreat in January. Impact Leadership is a tremendous experience for all that go through it, providing participants with career-long friendships and a broader understanding of the work we do and the opportunities available to you as a professional and leader within the TDM industry. And again, information is up on our website if you're interested. Now it's on to today's webinar, Preparing for a Flexible and Adaptable Future Commute, sponsored by TripShot. Today, a panel of experts will discuss their perspectives on what the future holds for transit and commuting. We'll assess how transit teams can plan and implement programs that are adaptable and flexible, meeting the rider and community's changing needs. It's now my pleasure to introduce and welcome our moderator, Rob Antoniak, Chief Customer Officer at TripShot, and now a two-time moderator for an ACT webinar. We're going to have to start building a list up there and see, kind of like Saturday Night Live, hosting capabilities. As Chief Customer Officer, Rob leads TripShot's team through each step of their customer journey, from the business development, training, and implementation, and on to customer success. Following his time as CEO at Valley Metro in Phoenix, Rob joined TripShot in 2019. At TripShot, he's combined his background in public transit leadership with his ability to show how cities, companies, and campuses can level up with new technology. Rob, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, David, and I'd echo your sentiment. It's great to get involved in ACT, and I know I've learned a lot through the association after spending a lot of time on the public side of the equation, and maybe not as close to TDM and all the work, the great work that we all do trying to get people out of their single occupant vehicles and onto other modes of transportation that are greener, more effective, more efficient, and everything else. So we're happy to be a sponsor today. For us at TripShot, our mission really is about simply and efficiently solving transportation's most pressing problems while we redefine mobility for all. And we truly believe, as a group of problem solvers, that mobility can change our world and make it better, make it a better place to work, make it a better place to live, all the above. For us at TripShot, we're a story about change. And so rather than talking about the last 18 months necessarily and kind of rehashing a lot of what we've talked about, or rather all adjusted to, we wanted to focus on this mentality of kind of preparing for that flexible future and adaptable future commute. And so, what do you do when you're trying to have a conversation like that? You go off and you get really smart people smarter than yourselves, and ask them to jump into this conversation with you. So joining me today, I'll introduce the three folks that are with us. Actually, I'll do it. A little different order than the pictures. Sorry, totally managing three screens. It's always fun in this virtual environment to try and manage three screens and windows and everything else while you're trying to MC. But Andrew Glass Hastings, affectionately known around the office as AGH, because there's about 5 Andrews at TransWest up in Seattle. He's the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships there. He's got an extensive amount of transportation experience, both public and private sectors. Worked for the city of Seattle, where he led some of the region's biggest transportation initiatives, worked in close partnership with King County Metro and private mobility providers to expand mobility options and achieve one of the best commute mode splits in the country. Andrew was a founding member of the policy team and the civic tech startup Remix. He worked in partnership with cities and transit agencies around the country to develop better systems to manage mobility. He's currently the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships, as I said, at TransWest, a full service provider of custom transportation and parking solutions, and resides in Seattle. And he states that he loves incorporating a new nearby light rail station into his daily life. So for those of you in the Pacific Northwest listening, big thank you from him for his new options around the neighborhood. Also with us, Kate Harrington, Outreach and Engagement Manager for Movability down in Austin, Texas. We wanted to make sure we kind of spread the wealth around and geography and attitudes and sort of everything else that's going on in the world and hear what's happening in Texas. She's been with Movability, Central Texas's, that's a tough one to say when you actually say it out loud. TMA, pardon me, since 2013. As Outreach and Engagement Manager, she oversees communications, events, sponsorships, and the work Movability does with service provider members. Prior to her work with Movability, Kate ran her own communications business where she did freelance reporting, editing, and content development. She has also worked as a newspaper reporter covering transportation, commercial real estate, and economic development in Austin. Even though AP style trained her differently, Kate has come to love the Oxford comma. Kate is a native New Englander, now living in Austin with her husband, son, and dog. And then I'd be remiss by not mentioning that we did have Paulo Nunez Bueno, I can't say it, teed up to join us and was advertised several times. He's up fighting the good fight in the state of Washington and actually had a conflict come up with one of the senators there to work on some pending legislation that's forthcoming in the current session. And so we said, hey, Paulo, who's better than you? And he suggested Brett. So Brett Dodson, he's the director of transportation and parking at also director of the Portland Aerial Tram at Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, Oregon. That is a mouthful. He directs both of those programs with 12 facilities in Portland and 20,000 daily commuters, as well as the Portland Aerial Tram, one of just 2 aerial commuter trams in the United States. I'm sure he's got some really cool stories to tell us about that. Under Brett's management, the tram ridership has grown from an average of 4,500 passengers a day to 10,000, actually, he was telling us today, pre-COVID. Brett guides the team focused on implementing creative transportation demand management solutions. They prioritize first and last mile programs, which reduce the single vehicle occupancy rate at OHSU from 45% to its current 35%. They manage 7,000 gated and ungated employee parking stalls with virtual permits, utilizing license plate camera technology and the latest sales and reservation software. Under his leadership, they received, back when we all were able to be together, the 2019 ACT TDM Excellence Award for a university. And he's been instrumental in the design of the Trams Bike Plaza and highly popular Bike Valet. He's also a recipient of several other awards. And prior to joining OHSU, Brett was the director of operations at Silver Mountain Resort, home of a 3.2 mile long gondola with a capacity of moving 3,500 riders per hour. Okay, I've got it all out there. So everybody kind of knows who everybody is. A fun fact about Brett is he also worked at a ski resort. So come on down to Bend, Oregon, where I'm sitting today, Brett, and join me in the snow dance so we can get some good pow early in the season and get up on the mountain. So with that, just going to jump right in. Today's panel is meant to be interactive. I'm going to ask each of the panelists maybe just talk a little bit, give us a minute or two about what the environment is like for them, what their daily walk looks like, and how they're engaging their stakeholders and that sort of thing. So I'm going to go with that in order of how I introduced everybody. Meanwhile, there will be some polls that Elizabeth is posting out there. We'd love to get an idea of who we're talking to, so that way we can adjust the conversation as we go, and would love to hear questions from those of you in the chat. I already see some comments coming in, but would love questions as we start. But let's go with that. AGH, why don't you kick us off?
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Rob. I'm glad to be a part of the conversation. Really curious, actually, the results of that first poll, 36% on other. Maybe those who voted on other can put their other in the chat box. We get a sense of where you're coming from. I notice in that list, we're remiss to include universities as one, so that might be one that folks are commenting on as well. So really curious to know where people are tuning in from. So again, I'm Andrew Glass Hastings, the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships with TransWest. And TransWest is a relatively small and relatively young full service mobility services operator based here, born and raised here in Seattle. We provide commuter shuttles, campus connections, first last mile services, parking sourcing and management. So we actually, for employers, for example, source a lot of park and ride lots. Oftentimes there are church lots that aren't used Monday through Friday, and help move employers to and from the office. Also have a great program management planning team, several of whom are tuned into the webinar here today. Hopefully they can contribute with some thoughts and questions. They're engaged in many of these topics on a daily basis. So it's been a really interesting time to come into the private mobility services environment. right in the midst of a pandemic. I think a lot of us thought that we were sort of saw the horizon here a few months ago, earlier in the summer. And then with Delta, things have gotten extended. But I for one am really optimistic and pretty bullish about the future of both the return to office and commuting. I think the commute is going to change and pretty much change in a variety of ways permanently, but by and large, we're going to continue to be a commuting population. I saw a statistic not too long ago that from July, 30% of employment nationally was working remotely. And so if of course, the inverse of that means that 70%, 7 out of every 10 workers in our country are working at their work site. So the vast majority of people, just a little bit earlier this summer, were still needing to get to their work site on a regular basis. So commuting isn't going away. It will certainly change, but this is a really important time to make sure that we work together, both on the transit, the public transit side, as well as the operator side, technology, find ways to partner and work together to make sure that we create a commute environment that really meets the needs of employees going forward as the commute patterns change. So I'm super excited to be a part of this conversation, be engaged in this work right now, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks. Rob, you are on mute.
Such a fail. That's not only the statement of 2020, but now also 2021, hopefully not 2022. Kate, what's happening at Movability in Austin, and how's the work down there with your stakeholders?
Well, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here with y'all today. And so I'll just give you a little bit of background about Movability. We are a TMA. We are the first and only TMA in the Central Texas region. And I know there are TMAs all over our country. We look a little bit different than a lot of the TMAs on the coast might. Part of that is because we don't get CMAQ funding here. We are not in non-attainment, I think is someone correct me if that's not the right term, but our employer members who come to us come voluntarily, not because they're compelled, and they come for a variety of reasons. We work with employers to help their employees connect with better commutes because they want to save money on facilities, parking costs, because they recognize that their employees want and need better work-life balance and want options beyond having to be stuck in traffic, because they want to attract a workforce that might not have access to private vehicles. They need to get to increasingly remote places as our region grows, and they don't have the ways to get there reliably. So we work with employers, we work with individuals, we work with service providers as well to try to lead the culture shift towards stress-free, affordable commute options. And yeah, I think Andrew hit the nail on the head. There's, commutes are happening and will continue to happen. We're certainly seeing high traffic volume here in Central Texas, but it's shifted quite a bit, right? The traditional peak rush hour times are not necessarily the only times that we're seeing traffic, or certainly people are going into work sites. So I don't think that I feel bold enough to predict exactly what's going to happen, but we're certainly working closely with employers and with commuters and with providers to try to understand, what are the challenges and the barriers right now that people are concerned about, and how do we really get out ahead of more people returning and help connect them with those better commutes.
Awesome. Brett, you've got a tram, you've got parking, you've got Portland.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been a wild year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with us being a medical center first and research right behind it, we have been extremely busy for the last year. So in terms of from a parking standpoint, we're kind of we've been running at 85 to 90% utilization. So we've been having to manage our parking throughout the entire time. Obviously the users really changed on us. We were, kind of a traditional monthly annual parking operation where people would, pay the biweekly payroll and that was what they parked, and anybody else came on transit and bike and stuff. And what we've seen is that our users really changed. A lot of our annual parkers are the ones that can now work remotely. And then the frontline workers that had to be in and were in the hospital, day in, day out, were ones that traditionally didn't have annual parking, and now they've switched. And they were either getting dropped off or doing rideshare or taking transit, and now they're driving. And so we've almost flipped what our user base is. And so as we look to come out of this, we're really it's going to be a balancing act of how many people come back who works remotely, but what we're hearing from everybody is they want more flexibility. They only want to pay for parking on the days they have to come in, and that type of a mode. So we've got a lot of opportunities to look at how do we move to more of a daily type parking operation, and daily transit and daily bike. Everything's more around those shifts that they pick up and want to transit, and not the other ones when they get to work from home. So lots of movement there, and we'll be talking about that as the questions come up in the next 40 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm gonna head that direction on the parking, because that's really where it starts for TDM, right? Is how do we get people to not park at their destination? How do we get them to park somewhere else first? So, maybe expand a little bit on that, Brett, and then the rest of the team here or the panel as we go is, what are some of the challenges you've seen? 80 to 90% parking ratio, that's big, that's tough, right? That's tough on the commute. It's tough on the people that are coming to the office. And are you at 100% capacity on campus with 80 to 90%? Okay, so you're going to see a lot of pressure on that. So what kind of challenges are you seeing in that environment?
Yeah, so we're at 50% on campus is all we're at right now, and yet we're still at 89% in terms of parking utilization. So I think what we've already started doing is looking at parking rides and working closely with the local transit authority of TriMet of what availability they've got at parking rides, what ones can we activate. Like we talked about, we do have the aerial tram, so that does give bike riding down to the bottom of the hill and where it's flat a good opportunity. So there's a big push on e-bikes, and bike share are going to be keys for us to try to get people onto that. So we're doing free loaner programs on bikes right now, and really trying to kick off things over the next couple of months that get people to look at those. And what we're finding is we've really got to have a kind of a buddy system where it's like, how do you match somebody up with a seasoned bike rider, or a seasoned transit rider, or a seasoned park and ride rider that they can they work closely with, and so that you can get them to try that other mode. Because what we're finding is the default is just to drive, and we've got to try to break that and get them to do something else.
Yeah, for sure. Andrew, Kate, Andrew, you guys lease out parking lots from churches. I can imagine that, y'all are going to see pressure on that as people are returning to work in Seattle.
I think the parking question, in my mind, goes directly to the issue of what a commuter's natural tendency will be if they have a personal car in their driveway or garage or on the street. And all of our efforts collectively as TDM professionals really need to be focused, like laser focused, on how to make all the other options of getting to and from work better than the default of getting in your car. And I think that's where in this concept of flexibility and thinking about sort of future flexible commute, we want to make sure that doesn't equal driving. Now, of course, part of that flexibility will be an element of driving. And I think there will be times when, I need to make sure, like even this afternoon, to be able to get to somewhat of an obscure location to be able to see my middle schooler play soccer. So, I drove in today, and there are external factors and costs associated with that. I just want to make sure that as in terms of my sort of flexible commute, that it just doesn't default to driving all the time. Because we all kind of know the externalities associated with that and the challenges presented, whether it's from congestion or the cost of personal car ownership, or climate, the impacts to climate. So really understanding how we can work, I'll probably say this a number of times over the course of this conversation, work really in partnership between public transit, the private operators, just the local, regional, state planners, the TMAs, the employers themselves, to think about how to provide transportation options that really hit very centered on that issue of flexibility, and provide great alternatives to driving. Because it's just right now, if there's that doubt of like, ooh, is even though all the data says transit's safe, there's that little inkling in someone's mind, not sure, or ooh, the buses changed a lot during COVID, or I'm not sure whether my employer is still providing the same option, so I'm just going to get in my car. And ultimately, that's not gonna serve us in the long term.
Yeah, for sure. Kate, I'm sure you want to expand on that, given some of the challenges with no CMAQ funding, and I think I can say from Arizona's perspective, not being too far of a neighbor, it's probably a very car-centric community that you're in.
It is. It's a very car-centric community, and add to that the challenge that Austin is, like many cities, it's growing quickly, and affordability is a challenge. So you have more employers and commuters moving farther out, which means they're perhaps moving away from those dense transit options, or the possibility to use transit in combination with biking. So that's a challenge. And then a lot of employers here still see free parking as a really necessary recruitment and retention tool for employees, which always makes us wince a little bit, because, as other panelists have said, if you have that free and abundant parking, and that's the default, it's going to be really hard to get people to use all the other options, even if you have a great suite of options. So we do work with several employer members to help them shift to daily parking, not providing the totally free parking for employees, and perhaps even implementing a parking cash out, so that employees get, say, $200 a month as a stipend, and they choose how to use that. They could put it towards parking. It probably won't cover their whole parking spot for the month, or for everyday daily parking for a month. But they could put it towards transit or bike share, or a combination of those things. The other aspect that we're hearing a lot lately, this is definitely a new kind of pandemic issue that's come up, is that employers who have leased parking spots as part of their office lease are now moving to a hybrid model, and would like to have some flexibility with those spots. Maybe they want to give some back because they're not using them all consistently, or be able to share spots, and they're running into some big walls with that. They're not able to give those spots back or share those spots. So we are trying to work with a number of stakeholders, from property managers and tenant representatives to city officials, to see if we can help untangle that a little bit and bring that flexibility into the office parking lease piece as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think that the flexibility keeps coming up, right? Flexibility in parking, flexibility in options. I mean, you look at the poll that we did, and I see that there's a question in there. Is that from your perspective, or is that from, what's going to happen in the world kind of perspective? I think reading fast there, but I think I'm looking for the results of it, and I had it. But folks on the call here today, audience members, are saying about 24% think the commute will stay the same. 49% work from home 2 to 3 days a week. 18% 4 to 5 days a week. So definite changes in office hours, maybe a little bit of driving more and using other modes. So, as we talk about parking flexibility, like what other types of things do we need to do as TDM professionals? I think we're all sort of getting comfortable, if we could say that, or at least adjusting to a norm that is different than it was a couple of years ago. But now we've got to get comfortable with adjusting ourselves and our policies and our tactics on what we're going to do to kind of change that behavior. So given what we've learned, what are some of those things that need to be kind of introduced that are preventing people from being more flexible in their commute? And I'm not picky. I'm not going to pick on any one of you. So, I mean, if somebody wants to put their hand up or come off mute, just interrupt and let's rock and roll. Feel free to interrupt each other in this one.
Well, and like, sort of asking a question on the question, but
Yeah.
Brett, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how your transition to daily parking is going and how that's being received by your stakeholders and the employees.
Yeah, so we're in the middle of it. Obviously we're still under modified operations until December. So we held off doing the full flip to what we're moving to a wage-based daily model, 100% across the board. So we were, like I said, we were traditionally monthly parking and annual parking, where you just, you pay for every 2 weeks on your paycheck, it comes out and you got that sunk cost and you might as well drive every day, because every day you don't, you're kind of wasting money. We're flipping it to a daily decision. So they'll have make reservations up to 8 days in advance. So that's kind of what a lot of shift blocks are issued out into. So we're giving them 8 days of reservation window. They can go on and log any reservations they need based on their schedule, and they can change it up to the day before. Pricing is based on whatever wage category they are within our system. And then they can move reservations throughout the time up until the day of. And so that gives them that flexibility of like, I was coming to work, but now my kid got sick. All I gotta do is log into their platform, cancel that reservation for the day and stay home, and they don't have to pay for parking. So we're really making it that daily decision. And then we're trying to figure out now is like, all right, so we've got parking, we're up in the ante there where it's going to be, you've got to pay for each day. There's a set price for it. It's based on your wage. And now we're going to try to figure out, all right, how do we slide the carrots in there? How do we make transit cheaper? How do we make biking cheaper? How we get people to make that decision of like, okay, I don't want to just do the default, jump in a car and drive because it's going to cost me $10. What if I, and what are those options I can do today? So one of the keys for us is really getting trip plans out there that are individually tailored to each employee. So we've got home address, and we're starting to lay in trip plans to them of like, hey, have you looked at this? This is we found a new route that's working better for you, because there has been, transit's changed. There's been new, bike paths have opened up and different things. And so it's really getting back to those employees that haven't even thought about it for 5 years because they've been on this annual parking permit, to now get them this trip plan of like, hey, did you know your 20-minute drive could be a 35-minute bike ride, but it'll save you $10 and this and that. So that's kind of our move, is to move to daily parking, but then also come in with that and really offer trip plans along with it that show any and all TDM options besides driving, and what the time is and what the cost difference is. Because between the two, we're going to try to find the sweet spot of either cost or time that gets some people to make that decision of like, okay, I'm not going to drive my car today, I'll do this instead.
I wonder whether I was like on that transition to daily. A colleague recently brought up, or former colleague brought up, this notion of, and Brett, I think you touched on it. You should, in the sort of around the premise of flexibility, the TDM kind of holy grail has been seen. All right, let's move from monthly, let's use some like fixed parking to more daily use, so that it's clearly more pay by use and not something that you're buying into at the beginning and then feel like you have to use or you've wasted that. I'm curious about the panel, but then also even the audience who's listening, thoughts and experiences around transitioning from monthly transit passes to more daily transit passes, or paying for transit fares on a more case-by-case basis. Now that to me, when I first thought of that, it seemed almost counterintuitive, because it's like, well, do we want to make transit sort of easy and less expensive and almost the default? So put a transit pass in someone's hand and they're more likely to use it. But in this realm of flexibility and the fact that people may only be commuting 2 or 3 days a week, or perhaps more or less, does that still make sense, or do we actually need to create more flexibility within our transit products as well? And with that, providing some limits so that someone doesn't have to pay, you have a daily limit, or you have, there's a weekly limit, so that there is a cost control aspect, which of course is a benefit of a monthly transit pass, but then also doesn't, force the user to have to pay $100 or more per month sort of upfront, and then have this card, whether it gets used or not. Curious the other thoughts on applying this notion to transit as well.
I saw Kate come off mute.
Sorry.
No,
I'm
go.
going to jump in because this has been such a hot topic recently in our area where, yeah, you nailed it. It's that, again, that flexibility. We have so many employers who, coming back might mean I'm coming to the office in, 2 days a week, or just in the morning, and working remotely the afternoon, or 3 days a week. And that might change from week to week. And suddenly that incentive for buying that bulk, week or month of transit passes isn't the same, right? Because if I activate it and then I only use half of my month's passes, I'm losing money. And we have a wonderful program here through our transit agency where employers can buy passes in bulk to distribute to employees and get a discount. But, right now it only applies to buying those week and monthly passes. So a lot of employers are starting to ask, can I buy individual passes to distribute to employees? Because that's what we really need. And that's going to, again, just be a lot and a more immediate carrot for them to hop on the bus or the train and use that. So I absolutely think that that piece of it, that flexibility in transit and how the fares are implemented is something that could be a great tool.
Have we seen, I mean, I'm hearing flexibility, and just a quick, I'll come back to the flexibility. Just a quick reminder, there is a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen if you're on Zoom, likely on the right-hand side of the bottom of the screen. So if you have a question, by all means, please push that to the Q&A so we don't miss them. Elizabeth is doing a great job monitoring, but we're seeing some questions in the chat, and I will try to pull those out here in a minute. But as we talk back to the parking and sort of even transit, right? So with flexibility comes risk and comes, the unknown, right? A parking manager, a parking owner, they sell monthly passes because they want annualized income, right? To pay for that parking facility. Public transit leader, we sold 15-day passes and 30-day passes, and because you had some assurity that the revenue was coming in, and you knew there was this time period that was going to be used up. What I'm hearing all of you say is this flexible environment needs flexible payment options, maybe even like fair, I'll say fair capping in the public side of things, right? You ride 5 times, you paid for your week, or you ride 10 times, you paid for your month, that kind of thing. How does that conversation go? How's that give and take happen? You all, the three of you, are in the middle of these things. I mean, what's that? I don't know if I've got a question there. I'm asking you to maybe expand on that pressure a little bit. But what does that look like? How do you give some assurances or some sort of framework that people can then plan by in that flexible environment? I mean, does public have to give? Does private have to give? Both? Maybe examples. I don't know. AGH, you blank staring at me.
Yeah, I'll jump in first. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a big risk, right? I mean, we had let's just rough it out. Like, we had a set $10 million revenue stream from annual passes coming in. I mean, that was $10 million a year, guaranteed. It was going to happen, and nobody's giving up. We have a 10-year wait list for parking, so it was a locked in. We're going to get that revenue by going to this daily. And what we did is we adjusted there was a question about the negotiations with unions, but yeah, we did not raise our rates at the highest level. And what we did is we offered to drop our rates as we went down the pay scale. So let's say the daily rate was $10. Going into this, our new rate, the highest would be 10, and then we'll drop it down to 9, 8, 7, 6, clear down to 5, based on how much somebody makes. So no matter what, we didn't see a rate increase. We just dropped it down. But what we're risking is, can we bring in that 10 million in revenue or not? If we can hit 90% utilization in a parking operation, we'll hit that revenue based on daily sales. But that's where, I mean, now it's a push-pull, right? Because from a TDM standpoint, I would love to be at 70% occupation utilization and have a bunch of people riding transit or taking bikes. But I will come up revenue short at that. But as an institution, we've made that decision. Yes, we can get more different people to park. It's going to be a better experience. We enhance the flexibility, and we've got a revenue risk. But overall, it's not, the revenue is not the reward here. The reward is getting less people to drive and park on campus. And so we got buy-in from executive leadership that, if we're under by 2 million, that's actually a good thing. And so it's a give on the institution side, because our goals are to reduce single occupancy vehicle so that we can build more infrastructure, add more buildings, expand. And so the institution's got to be like, okay, to hit these SOV rates, I've got to give up front end revenue from parking revenue, because if I hit the SOV rate, then all of a sudden I'm going to get the building permits and be able to build and expand. So it's kind of, there is a give and a take there, but right off the bat, going to a daily model, we run a risk of not bringing in that guaranteed 10 million that we would have brought in off an annual fixed rate model.
I mean, that's a really interesting conflict. When you've got revenue coming off of parking, and you're trying to balance that with other TDM options. And I think one of the things that it made me think about was something that I've completely lost my train of thought. So I'm going to turn it back over to Rob, and then until I remember that great point that I was just going to make.
Well, let's. I mean, Kate, did you have something to add?
No, I'm in a similar boat. I had a thought, and I'm reading that there's some excellent points in the chat, and then Brett said something that caught my attention, and now I have 3 thoughts at once. But it's a really interesting conundrum that you have these goals that are kind of in conflict with the revenue piece. So
and I would say just as the other, from an executive level, our other argument is that we'll lose a couple $1 million potentially in flat revenue from annual permits, but what we're going to do is we're deferring having to build a $75 million parking structure because we're not going to have the demand for it. So that's the other piece that we've got in play is like, look, if we can go to daily, we can reduce parking demand, we can utilize what we already have, we don't have to build new. That's going to save you $75 million by not having to build a parking structure. And so that's the other one that we've got in our back pocket is like, all this works together, but we've got to have everybody synced up from a finance side and an operations side to make sure we're united in drop the SOV rate, and here's the benefits of it. And it's going to save you this much on the long term, which is not building a concrete parking structure.
Well, and so not only will you potentially have a revenue reduction if you meet your TDM goals, but then if the employer, the organization, Brett, in your case, the hospital is investing more in transit or investing more in shuttle or other types of mobility services, that could actually be a cost increase. And so how does, especially even if transit is on a pay by use model, if we're all successful getting people in other modes, then there's going to have to be a cost associated with that. And I wonder, as we move forward and more, especially I think about here in Seattle and that stat 30% nationwide of employees working from home. In a city like Seattle, in particular, downtown Seattle, Amazon's located. That percentage is much higher right now, and so if those employers are going to need to provide a different type of commuter benefit going forward, if the employees aren't necessarily commuting to the office Monday through Friday from 9 to 5. And what does that look like? How does that serve that need for flexibility? I think it's going to be less about a commuter benefit, and I think we're going to start hearing more about just mobility benefits, something that an employee can take advantage of, not just when they're trying to get to and from the office in downtown Seattle, but also when they're trying to move about their lives in general. And I say that because I think especially a certain spectrum of employers are going to have to find new and creative ways of recruiting, but also retaining talent. And if you have employees who are working from home, either completely, like a lot of them are now, or a part of the time, there is some cost to that. There is some cost in the connection to your fellow employees, to the culture of the organization. How do employers keep employees and the top talent from essentially becoming mercenaries who are willing to jump ship when another employer is going to pay them more if they don't have that same connection? So how can the benefits that employers offer employees, how can that be one of the ways that there is that retention aspect to this, and recognizing employers, I keep using that word wrong, and the employees are looking for more flexibility and options. I think there is a way that you can marry those two, provide more options, do it in a way that seems to really appeal to the employees' and lifestyle, the way they move about their lives, and then can be an attraction and retention focus.
For sure. Kate's leaning in. Did you remember that, the thought? No?
Oh, no, I've had like 5 since then, because everyone is bringing up great points. And yeah, I'm not sure I have an answer for, it seems like it would have to be almost a, per employer cultural decision on how to, foster those connections and really make sure that there is a cohesive culture and collaboration happening even when people are remote. But I bet there's a creative way to do that and still incentivize using different mobility options, even if it's for personal trips. We did a gamification program last year when we were really in one of the peaks of COVID, that was incentivizing people to walk and bike places for personal trips, so that they could better establish those habits if it was something they were already doing, or maybe start those habits if it was new to them, and hopefully carry that over eventually, perhaps into a commute, or just for reducing shorter trips in their personal life. So I think that there's a model for something like that for employers to do going forward.
Yeah, let's do this. We've got about a little less than 10 minutes left, I think, before we want to have Elizabeth and David close us out, right? So we've got a couple questions in the Q&A, and maybe just kind of quick hitters here. Have any of you developed or used mobility wallets for these flexible transportation funds that could be applied to one or more alternatives rather than just a fixed choice that, and I presume, and thank you, Terry O'Connor, for the question. I presume that's meaning getting away from, you have to buy this much on transit and this much in parking. Has anybody done that yet? And it sounds like Brett's getting into that a little bit, but anything? Yes, no? Looking at it, exploring it?
Yeah, we're heavily exploring it. I think Alex put in the comments that the city of Portland's got one running, which has been, I think, pretty successful. We've been really monitoring that. We think it's a great one to look at. And so we're looking at it and trying to figure out how we would pull it together. We know we have to get to daily parking first. This doesn't work on monthly and annual for us. So we have to get to the daily first. And then once we get to the daily, then we'll look at building the wallet.
So it's a journey, not a step, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And we're planning on 3 to 5 years, but the pandemic accelerated us. So we're just like, we're all in now over a 12-month period. So, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So I think this is, Terry hit the nail on the head in terms of where the packaging of the commuter, the traditional commuter benefit is going. And it's got to go in the direction of the mobility wallet, or we as an industry are going to continue to lose people, lose commuters to, or maybe not lose them. We will fail to convince them that there are better options if they are doing that. Traditional, the money is taken out of my paycheck and I buy my monthly parking pass and that's that. But to have something that allows me on a day-by-day potentially basis to decide what's the best way for me to get to the office, get to my work site today. It may be to park. Hopefully more often than not, it's to take advantage of a platform that shows me the public transit options, the shuttle options that are provided by my employer, the bike and scooter options, if it's either first last mile or perhaps other types of, if I even want to take a scooter down to the coffee shop because I'm meeting a client or meeting a colleague there instead of going into the office. That's a different form of a commute trip. And I should be able to use my wallet for that trip as well.
Let's do this. Let's pivot to the second question. I'm gonna pick on Kate a little bit here because you've got the clash of urban and rural happening in your area, and rather than the Titanic size kind of companies, as Jesse points out in the question, are you seeing any engagement in sort of non-traditional large Fortune 100 companies or smaller companies coming to the mix and doing things with TDM, and what are you seeing? And then if I'm going to say this, if AGH or Brett have anything to add to this, go for it. But I want to pose one more provocative question about public and private before we get off this topic, before we move on. So go for it, Kate.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, we are starting to see a more of the smaller employers, and then the employers who are outside of those dense cores where it's easier to do TDM. Definitely pay attention to this. And it goes back to something I mentioned earlier, which is that especially manufacturing, other types of more industrial jobs are starting to build up here in the surrounding areas around the urban core, and including hospitality. They really need to get their employees to work, and their employees don't always have access to a private vehicle. So it's necessary. They've got to find some kind of TDM solution. Otherwise, they're just never going to be able to hire the talent and get fully back up and running. So a lot of people are interested in carpooling or ride matching shuttles. There's certainly examples, the solution that a lot of those folks are looking at. And then we have a micro grant program for locally based small businesses and nonprofits that we run here. And we've had a lot of interest in that. Even if it's just $5,000 to install a bike rack, it makes a really big difference to getting more clients and employees in different ways where they don't have to necessarily pay for parking or pay to drive.
Cool. The question I wanted to pose before we close, maybe we can close on this and round robin. I'll put y'all on the spot. Public, and I'll speak from my experience a little bit on public transportation. When I was in public transportation, and still am, in terms of working with some of our customers, but as a public transit leader, it was often hey, you need to come to us and use us, right? And it was really eye-opening for me to pivot into the TripShot family and take on a role that was predominantly corporate at the time and starting to pivot into public, to see this corporate environment that honestly, the Bay Area, Seattle, Austin is starting to get there. Some of the East Coast cities had systems collectively between one or two very large employers in the shadows that were larger than the 900 buses we ran at Valley Metro in Phoenix, Arizona, the 20th largest transit agency. That was shocking to me. What is it that public and private need to be doing to work together? I mean, we see shared shuttles happening in the Bay Area. We see challenges, I'm going to call it out. We see challenges in Seattle that you have to get the public transit agency to approve that you could share a shuttle because it has to be evaluated. When, as somebody that was a public transit leader, I say, well, gosh, if they want to do it, let them do it. Can I pivot the resources over here? So what are some of those public-private barriers? And last, maybe give each one of you a minute and just kind of talk about what do we need to do to break down those silos that the two are working together to solve this problem?
I'll say very quickly, focus on expanding the pie. More transit service is better regardless of the color of the bus. Finding creative ways of working together, whether it's shared shuttle pilots or a pilot we've worked on successfully here in Seattle with King County Metro to share bus stops with some major employers here locally. We ran a pilot and were able to demonstrate that private shuttles sharing public transit stops, which are very conveniently located and have dedicated curb space, does not necessarily lead to a negative impact on public transit operations. Again, it's finding those ways to keep the focus on helping people move out of single occupancy trips and growing that pie of transit regardless of the color of the bus.
And I'm just going to hop in real fast and say, I think two areas where there could be collaboration is with first last mile solutions and with park and rides, whether it's sharing them, collaborating on them. Those are two definite areas of synergy.
Sharing the public ones with private companies and vice versa, maybe, learn on some of Seattle's examples where churches are using their parking lots during the days that they're not going to church. Is that what you mean? Parking?
Exactly, or even
Yeah.
even the public agency park and rides, being willing to share those with some of the
Yeah.
shuttles as well.
I don't know. Right, you're probably at the impasse of this. Public institution, public transit agency, lots of private influence around you. What do you think?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones for me is figuring out and getting the agreements in place so you can share the data. I mean, as the public, transit starts to get data, that everybody, they're starting to get taps, they're starting to get data, you've got it. From a private entity, we need that data to know where our employees are at and what they're doing. So then we can come to the table together and kind of create, because right now it's hard to come together and say, hey, we could subsidize this bus ride because it comes here because it backs up. I know I've got this many employees coming. If we don't know the data and how many are riding and what it is. So it's really figuring out how to collaborate on the data so that we can come together at the table and start setting up these, these pilot projects and these subsidized things to get them and then kick them off. And I think that's where private industry can come in and run a shuttle for a little bit and make sure it's viable and it works. But then I know what we try to do is we try to steer everybody towards public transit. And it's more, if we've got a gap in public transit, we work with them and try to show the gap and then get them to supply the service to that gap and not us shoving a shuttle in there and running side by side with it. So We've really gotten out of the shuttle business. We try to leverage public transit, but the gap is like knowing what our employees are doing and so we can look at how do we get the wins either from time of day or route selection and that kind of stuff. So, but it's there for us. I don't think private should be running the shuttles. I think that it's really public transit and how do we support them and make them get as much ridership as possible.
Right on. Well, Brett, thank you for joining us. Thank you for filling in better than Paula would have done. So really appreciate you.
Shoes to step into, so I didn't.
Kate, thank you very much for joining us from Texas and AGH or Andrew. Thank you for joining us from Seattle today. We really appreciate everybody's time as we're closing out. I know Elizabeth is going to probably, or David is, one of them might have a word or two as we close out. Our emails will be on the screen. I think I can speak for all four of us. We are more than happy to stay engaged in this conversation. There are a lot of questions we did not get to today. It was really actually tough. Loved the interaction. I think we could keep these going. So I'll look for my third opportunity jacket, David, and we'll go from there. But from Bend, Oregon, if you happen to be in town, there's always a cold beer or a warm coffee. Look me up and say hello. And to my friends, I'll take the liberty of being the host and say to my friends in Arizona at ASU, I saw you on the call. I saw some friends at Valley Metro. You're missed, and stop by if you're in the hood, and I'll do the same. So Elizabeth, David, I'll give it back to you. Thanks a lot.
I'll just say thank you. I know we're at the top of the hour here. Please make sure to join us for our upcoming virtual discussion on next Friday, October 15th. We're going to be part 2 of a feature on recent finalists for ACT National TDM Awards. So it should be a great conversation. And we'll see you then.
Thanks, everybody.